Hey everyone, this is Bo. Welcome to the shop. In this video, we're going to be making a set of stools. Well, I shouldn't say a set. We're building 4 individual stools for 4 individual people. And they are not your everyday stool. This is going to mount a big tractor seat like you see here. The bases of them are all a little different in the seat, so it makes every stool a little unique. And so what I have behind me is a bunch of lumber that's been initially milled and been resting for a day. I now have to sort through this stack of lumber and define which stool parts are going to come from which board, make sure I got enough quantity of them all. I kind of did this before I rough cut everything to length and width, but I was being a little bit conservative in my sizes. So now I have to go through and fine tune it and then start ripping the material to width and then laminating them together for some thicker stock. So here we go, let's get to it. So all the parts have been ripped to a rough width on the table saw. Got lots of parts behind me here. Feeling a little disorganized at this moment. So what I want to do next is I want to cut everything to a rough length and consistent. Some of these boards have, may have 2 or 3 components in their one board. I need to laminate these together. That's not going to help me. I need to have just single units that I can laminate with something else. So what I do next is cut all these to rough length, get them sorted, and then I'll start laminating the pieces together to make up very thick parts. Everything's gonna be very thick for these benches, or for these stools, excuse me. And so we're gonna have some heft here. We are finally at the stage to start cutting some parts to size and to angles. So let me explain here. All the legs of the stool are going to be 5 degrees splayed inward as well as inboard. So kind of 2 degrees or 5 degrees one way, 5 degrees the other. And I'm going to cut that angle on the table saw. And I'm going to cut at the same time. So I have my miter gauge set to 5 degrees. And I don't really care if the angle is 5 degrees for both, if it's 4.9, 5.1, whatever. I care that they're the same. And so I've set my miter gauge to 5 degrees, and I've used my sliding bevel T-square here to establish that same miter angle on here, and I've used that to set the bevel of my blade, because once again, I don't really care if it's 5 degrees, I just want it to be the same as my miter. So when I cut these pieces, that angle is the same, both left to right and front to back. Because I'm going to leave the table saw blade set at this bevel for all of my rip cuts for my rails, since the top rail has to match that angle, and I'm also just going to have that bottom rail match that same angle, make it easier on myself. And then this miter angle is going to be used when I cut the ends of the rails. I'll be cutting that at a 5 degree angle, and that's gotta match up and butt up against the side of the leg. So this setup stays the same for all these cuts that are upcoming here. The only thing that changes is essentially the length of the cut, and then what face I'm going to cut. Anyway, so I've got my board marked here. It can get very confusing about which way the leg has to be to get the proper cut. And so I've got a couple O's here for outside and outside, and those help me, those are my references. And so I know with my miter gauge tilted to the right and my saw beveled over, that I'm always going to be removing material that is closest to the fence and closest to the saw bed. And so that helps me know that if I'm cutting the top of the leg, I got to cut off, if it's like this, I'm cutting off the outside face, and I'm also cutting off this outside face because it's tilted in. When it's on the bottom, it's the exact opposite. I'm cutting off, I want to cut off both interfaces to get that to line up correctly. So if I cut my top, I want to cut both the outside faces, so that means one's going to go into the saw bed, one O is going to go into my saw fence. I'll make my cut, and that should be appropriate. So that's what we're going to do now. We're going to start cutting these lengths, or these legs, 2 different lengths. I've got, I'm making 2 30-inch bar stools and then 2 24-inch bar stools. So I've got some different leg sizes back here. They're all been marked out with my O's for what face I think looks the best. And so here we go. We're going to start cutting it. So while the legs have been cut to length, one little double check is that on the top of your legs, where all 4 pieces meet, is a point, and on the bottom, it's the exact opposite, it's a hollow. So all those legs have been cut to length. Another way to help prevent errors during these compound angled cuts is to cut your stop block to the corresponding angle. So when you butt your board up against it, it should match. It should all the surfaces should align. If you have a gap somewhere, you know you've got your board, your piece flipped some wrong orientation. So that's been cut. Next up is to cut the rails to width. These are jointed on one end, rough on the other. So I'm going to leave the table saw blade at 5 degrees, and I'm going to rip these to width. For this, if you exaggerate how these rails are going to be, like if this is a very steep angle, like 45 degrees, I'm going to want to cut off. This edge here is the one I want to cut off. So that would tell me that my O, my outer face, has to be against the saw bed, and my bottom has to be against the fence. I'll rip them all to 2 and 3 inches. 2 inches for the bottom rail, 3 inches for the top rail. Then I'll take the blade to perpendicular, back to 0, leave my miter gauge at 5, and I'm going to be cutting these all to their appropriate lengths. That is going to get a little confusing because the legs are not perfectly square. They're all 2 inches wide, but they're all different thicknesses. Some are a little less than 2 inches, some are more than 2 inches. So I have to figure out what the appropriate rail dimensions are going between the 2 thicknesses of the legs. That's what's up next. So let's get to it. Here we go. All right, I've got the camera zoomed in real tight here, so I'm going to talk a little bit about mortise locations. One of the challenges with making stools and small legs is trying to pack a bunch of mortise strength into these legs when you have basically two rails that are going to intersect this leg. So for the top rail, actually for all the rails, I'll say that the inside surface is going to be flush with the inside surface of the leg for all the top and bottom rails. And what I'm going to do is for the top rail, since I have so much length, I'm able to pack a lot of mortise locations in here. And so what I'm going to do on the rail is for the outside surface, I'm going to have two coming this way and then two coming this way. Those will not interfere with each other by my little, might be hard to see, there's a little diagram on top. For these inboard ones, I'm actually going to alternate. One's going to be on the top over here, and one is going to be on the lower side down here to allow them to pass through each other, one underneath the other without them interfering. For the lower leg, since I don't have as much height, I can't stack two tenons. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put one tenon in the center offset, kind of like this. That's going to be consistent for all rails, and those won't interfere since they're so far from the leg. For the other one, I'm going to do the same offset, one top and then one bottom, but since I don't have enough vertical space, what I'm going to do is I'm going to modify the tenon, and I'm basically going to cut off about 5/16 of an inch off the edge so those can pass by each other without interfering. Next up is I need to get all the individual parts laid out with lines kind of similar to this, where the mortises are going to go, the same with the legs, and then I got to sort everything because they're all different. All the mortise dimensions are a little bit different, so I have to get them all organized so I don't screw this up, which is still very likely to happen. So here we go. So all of the mortises have been cut for the stools. Over 320 mortises in total had to be cut, 10 per leg, 4 stools. Quite a few mortises. Anyway, I want to talk a little bit about mortise, the tenon fit and the mortise. I noticed as I was cutting these, especially in the face grain of the stools, that the fit was extremely loose. I hear that. In all the face mortises, it's a little bit tighter in the end grain mortises, but still not great. So this is a generic domino. I have noticed that the batch, at least I have now, is a little bit thinner, and so I bought a new batch of festival dominoes. Those do fit better. Still a little loose in the face grain parts, not near as bad as the generic ones. But I think I'm going to try making my own tenon stock, just a little bit thicker than what these are, to correct this issue, since that fits a little bit too loose for my liking. So we're going to make tenon stock, and then we're also going to do some sanding, which I'll save you from watching that. And then we're going to glue up the leg assemblies, start making this thing look a little bit more like a stool. So here we go, let's get to it. All right, so all 4 stools have been clamped up. They're all assembled. At least the bases are assembled. I sanded each one individually and then clamped it up, moved on to the next one, sanded it, clamped it, just so I wouldn't go crazy from sanding constantly. And while I was sanding, I was trying to figure out the best way to do this next step, which is attaching a metal seat to a wooden stool. If I was doing a wooden seat, I would just have a couple of dowels and upper rails, maybe a number of tabletop fasteners holding that seat down to the base. But with this big metal seat, I can't do that. Maybe if I welded something on the bottom, I could kind of have it nest in there. But my approach is going to be that I'm actually going to recess a 3/4 inch piece of plywood in there into these top rails, and that was the reason why these rails are so thick, or so tall and thick, is because I knew I was going to recess something in the top here. And in order to do that and have it consistent in the stools, I had to make a template. And so what I have next to me here, I think you make it on the camera, yes, is a bunch of little finger pieces like this, and they all butt together to make what essentially looks like a big plus sign. And so that plus sign is going to get routed out into all the tops of all the stools. That piece of plywood will drop in there. I'll then cover it with a piece of oak. For 2 reasons. One, aesthetics. You can see through this seat base. As well for hardness, right? It's going to be a metal contacting a piece of hardwood. And you see there's a big bolt that goes through here that's going to draw the seat down onto the base. And so I want a hardwood to interact with this metal. So that's what's next. I'm gonna glue and staple this template together. I'm gonna get a pattern bit in the router, and then start cutting these recesses and tops of the stools. So here we go. All right, so the stool's been sanded. This plywood insert's been inserted and glued into the grooves. I've been sanded flush. I was my stool frame was a little bit high of the plywood, so I had to do a fair amount of sanding there. But next up is to actually cut the panels to size that are going to cover the top and bottom. So 1/2 inch panel for the top. That's going to go up here. It's going to glue just to the plywood, and then I'm going to flush trim it. Flush it up to the exterior surface of the stool, and then we actually have some thinner panels. These are like 1/4 inch panels. These are going to go on the inside, on the bottom, kind of making a little sandwich of that piece of plywood in there. So a couple challenges. Flush trimming this is going to be a little bit tough because getting into these small little like where the rail and the leg meet, getting in there is going to be pretty tough. Probably have to use a chisel to clean that up. And then for the bottom,
Should be pretty straightforward, except for clamping it. I'll have to come up with some type of clamping jig that can go in there and sandwich these things together and hold them in. Since there's such a tall rail here, I won't be able to easily clamp that. So yeah, that's what we're gonna do next. We're gonna cut these, cut the panels all down to size, and then I think we're ready to, after that, I think we'll be ready to glue them up. So here we go, let's get to it. All right, so the seats have been attached to the stools, and I did not film it. A, I was in a bit of a rush, and B, I was kind of making it up as I went along. But I was going to take one apart and just kind of talk about it a little bit. So first off, there is a hole in the center of the seat that would accept, for this specific one, it wants a, what would be like a square-headed bolt, which couldn't find. So I just ground off the edges of a standard hex bolt and kind of made my own little square bolt that will fit in the seat. It goes through this spacer, which I'll talk about in a sec, through the stool seat, and then there's a large washer and nut on the bottom to tighten it all down. Also on the bottom of the seat, on at least 3 of the 4 seats, there's these ridges alongside the hole. And so this little spacer block that I'll zoom in on here in a moment, it is sized to fit between these 2 ridges, so the seat can't spin, can't rotate. And as well, that spacer allows the front of the seat, since this very front edge actually hangs down lower than the mounting point, it allows it to be above the seat base and not sitting on the seat base. And this spacer block has just been screwed to the top, so if there's any reason in the future where you no longer want the metal seat, you can just take this off and we can maybe mount a different type of seat to the top, a wooden seat. One last note, the seat is pushed back as far as it can go, and that's for comfort. I would have liked to mount the seat in the center and kind of cover up more of the seat base, but it's just not comfortable. So with it being as far back as this, it allows your legs at a more comfortable. If you're up forward, it kind of feels like you're always falling off the stool. So I got it as far back as I could go. If I was being honest, I would have made the seat a little bit deeper front to back, so I could have sat even a little further back and had my feet on the front rungs here. But all in all, pretty comfortable. Next up is I'm going to take all the seats off, and I'm going to do final sanding, and then get it ready for some finish. So here we go. So after 3 coats of polyurethane with a sand of 400 grit in between those coats, I used Armor Seal, similar to what I used on my bench project, my last bench project, and also similar to that, I'm rubbing it down with some 4/0 steel wool, a little bit of water, and some solution here. And I think this is just, I bought this not knowing what was in it, but I think I read the ingredients. It's just like dish soap and water. So it's really not nothing too special. And so I'm just rubbing this out to get off all the little dust nibs that settled since the oil takes so long to dry. This is not the cleanest environment, so of course it gets some little bit of particles on there, and it's a little bit not rough, just kind of get the occasional little bumps and stuff like that. So this just kind of knocks those down and gives it a nice little satin sheen. So here we go. So when I first started woodworking, I would use oil-based polyurethane quite a bit due to its, I didn't have any spray equipment when I first started, so just wiping it down with by hand with oil made a lot of sense. But I always had this same problem where when I was done, the finish was pretty rough, sometimes a little bit uneven in sheen. And so when I first started, I'd actually rub it down with like wet sandpaper, like automotive sandpaper, like 1000 grit, whatever, wet. And then I would apply wax to my pieces, not knowing how big of a pain in the butt it is to maintain a wax finish in terms of like maintenance and cleaning and stuff like that. So that then pushed me away from oil finishes, and I went purely water for the reason of like I could spray it. The finish was always nice and smooth when it was done, nice and even. Didn't have to worry about this post step here. Well, over the years, there's some projects like this that are really hard to spray. All these legs in different angles, it'd be a pain to spray this thing. And so being able to use a wiping finish, especially an oil-based one that's a little bit more durable than water, is the ideal. But once again, you get left with this rough surface when you're done. So this solution here, just steel wool, some water, some rubbing compound, or like I said, I think it's just soap and water, is really kind of a great compromise, and leaves a nice feel to the touch. Kind of a uniform sheen because you rubbed it all down, and yeah, it's a really good solution. So now that we're done, I've got 2 more stools to rub out, rub out. Now I had 2 more stools to rub down here, and then we're going to start assembling the seat tops back to the stools. So we'll catch up there. Here we go. Hey everyone, I want to take a few minutes to talk a little bit about a finishing process. If you notice, these 4 stools, those 3 look pretty similar. This one over here looks a little different, and that's okay. These are all 4 stools going to 4 different people. They don't have to match. But what I was going for is trying to make red oak look more like white oak. Of course, I can't match the grain pattern exactly, but I was trying to pull out that same rich brown color. So that started with some bleach to a 2-part bleaching product by Zinsser to try to pull out some of the reds and the pinks and stuff. And then after that dried, went with it with some different dyes diluted in water. Some greens, some browns, a little bit of gray put on there, and then a little bit of stain to bring out some more of the browns. And then I finished with the same oil-based poly that the rest of the stools were finished in. Some parts look really nice, like some of this area turned out really nice. Nice dark browns. In the middle here's nice. But some of the wood just really soaked up the bleach, especially some of these lower stretchers just really pulled that bleach in. And once it was so washed out, it was hard to get some of that color back. Next time I'll use more sample pieces. I only had 1 sample board and didn't really have enough experimenting to do with the bleach. But anyway, turned out okay. I'm pretty happy with it. If you made it this far, thanks for watching. Hi. So thanks for watching. If you made it this far, appreciate that. If you liked the video, give it a thumbs up. If you have a question or comment, feel free to leave that below. And if you want to catch my future content, feel free to subscribe, and you'll catch some of my upcoming work. Thanks.